On today's show, the ESPN NBA Top 100 rankings are fully released, and Alperen Sengun was absolutely disrespected by ESPN. Where do other Houston Rockets fall on the list, like Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet, and Jabari Smith Jr.? It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way that you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. And while you're there, drop us a comment, share some thoughts on the episode. Just say Go Rockets. It helps us out a ton. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, we're going to talk about the ESPN NBA Top 100 rankings and the absolute disrespect towards one Alperen Sengun, who clocks in at number 54 on the ESPN ranking list. We're also going to talk about where Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet, and Jabari Smith Jr. landed on the list, as well as a little bit later on, we'll talk a little bit about Rockets Spurs later in the episode. Let's start with the Sengun ranking, because my goodness, you would think after the year that Sengun had, complete breakout season, finished third in most improved player of the year voting, posted 21, 9, and 5, was the Rockets' best player and helped lead the team to 41-41, a 500 record after finishing with just 22 wins the season before. Clearly was the best player on the floor for Houston. You would think that ESPN would have given him a little bit more respect. I find it ridiculous. So first off, he was not ranked last year. So he wasn't ranked, so he goes from being unranked all the way up to 54. And this is what ESPN had to say about him. So this is their blurb in the article. Coming off his best season, Sengun averaged career highs in points, rebounds, assists, and steals on the way to finishing third in voting for NBA Most Improved Player. Along the way, Sengun became the second youngest Rocket behind Jalen Green in 2022-2023 to average 20 or more points in a season. Houston sent 3 player development staffers to work with Sengun for nearly 7 weeks over the summer in his native Turkey, and the club came away even more optimistic about his prospects for this season. The staff focused heavily on Sengun's preparation and believes he has become a more mature player. Pardon me. All right, I don't take exception to that's all fine and good. That's fine. There's not really any negative reasoning for that ranking of 54. But then you start to take a look at the players around Alperen Sengun, and it draws into question the integrity of this entire list. Case in point, 53rd on the list, RJ Barrett of the Toronto Raptors. RJ Barrett has zero claim to be ranked ahead of Alperen Sengun. I don't care whether you're looking at offense, whether you're looking at defense, I don't know what metrics ESPN was looking at when they decided they were going to drop RJ Barrett directly in front of Alperen Sengun. It's almost more insulting that RJ Barrett is directly in front of Alperen Sengun. That's kind of where I'm at on this. 52nd on the list is Franz Wagner. Now, don't get me wrong. I like Franz Wagner. I really do like him as a player. I don't think he's ahead of Alperen Sengun. I think Sengun is clearly the better player right now between the two of them. However, I also think Franz is a little bit too low on this list. OG Anunoby at 51. Really love OG as a player. Should not be in front of Alperen Sengun. Aaron Gordon at 49. Should not be in front of Alperen Sengun. Julius Randle, 48, shouldn't be in front of Alperen Sengun. This is not Julius Randle from a couple seasons ago where he was an all-star and he was shooting, a ridiculous percentage from 3. This is Julius Randle coming off a significant injury and hasn't been healthy in a minute and should not be at 48th on this list. So here's my thing. And then Evan Mobley at 47. Don't even get me started on Evan Mobley. Look, Evan Mobley is a good young player, but he is one of the most overhyped, over-gassed up young players in the entire NBA today. I'll go on my Evan Mobley rant in a second. Here's my thing, is there's a difference between like the best player on a team, the guy who the offense is predicated on, all the actions run through a player like that, a player like Alperen Sengun, right? The expectations and the defensive attention that is dedicated to a guy like Alperen Sengun is worlds different than what guys like Aaron Gordon and OG Anunoby, and even further down this list, Derek White, have to deal with. I think Derek White clocks in at, I think he comes in at 39 on the list. Some of this is definitely recency bias. Like, yeah, he played a great role on Team USA and all that stuff. But a lot of these guys that are ranked ahead of Alperen Sengun are, and again, not to discredit them as basketball players. I don't think anybody on this list is a bad player per se. But you have to take into context the different roles in which these players play for their respective organizations. And Alperen Sengun is the best player on his team. The buck starts and stops with Alperen Sengun for the Houston Rockets. And he excelled in that role last year, and he helped lead the Rockets to a 19-win improvement, 41-41. So for me, it's hard for me to see players that are not even the second or third or even fourth best player on their team ranked ahead of Alperen Sengun on this list, especially when their roles are so drastically different, right? These are not players that are expected to be dynamic offensive hubs where everything runs through them, where they're expected to do the heavy lifting for their team. A lot of the guys that I just mentioned, right? OG, Aaron Gordon, Derek White, these are like high-end level role players, right? Guys who slot in and play next to the star caliber players on their respective rosters. And so it's really hard for me to think that those guys belong ahead of Alperen Sengun on this list. And you can start getting into the nitty-gritty stuff like, okay, well, how are these guys, how's, defense compared to these guys, whatever. Like, do you value defense more? Do you value offense more? All these different things. First off, and I will say as a quick aside, I think Alperen Sengun's defense is being slept on. He is a much, much improved defender. He looks like he's already moving better this preseason. His body looks to be in the best shape of his entire career so far, and I have incredibly high hopes for the fact that he's bound to, I feel like, level up even more this season compared to last season. So I get through all of that to just say that I feel like ESPN is completely sleeping on Alperen Sengun. I feel like the rank of 54 is honestly pretty disrespectful. Sengun is clearly a top 50 player in the NBA. He's arguably probably a top 40 player in the NBA. And he's probably this season going to be flirting with being, at a minimum, a top 30 player in the association when it's all said and done. Probably flirting with that, somewhere in that 20 to 30 range, give or take, about, just when you look at from a sheer production standpoint. And again, assuming the Rockets use him as an integral piece of what they try to accomplish again this year, I can't imagine that the counting stats aren't going to go up yet again. If he finishes the year somewhere like a 25-10 and 25-10-6 or 25-10-7, those are literally Domantas Sabonis numbers. Where's Sabonis on this list? Sabonis was ranked at 29th, Sabonis ranked 29th on this list. That's probably where Alperen Sengun, is that's his trajectory on this list, but he should not be all the way down at 54. It's just honestly ridiculous work by ESPN. I am curious your thoughts. Where should Alperen Sengun have been on this list? Who doesn't deserve to be ahead of LP on this list? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Coming up, we're going to talk about where Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet, and Jabari Smith Jr. ranked on the ESPN Top 100 list, as well as we'll get to a little bit of Rocket Spurs later on in the episode. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. Take a look at all the different odds. You can check out their parlay builder, different season leaders, season awards, division winners, or just the outright favorites for the Super Bowl. Right now, the Kansas City Chiefs plus 500 to win it all this season. The 49ers plus 700. The Ravens right behind them at plus 750. The Bills plus 850. The Lions at 950. And then your Houston Texans at plus 1100. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right. Let's continue on this ESPN Top 100 list for this NBA season. And the next Houston Rockets showing up on the list, 15 slots after Alperen Sengun, is one Jalen Green, who clocks in as the 69th best player. Nice. On the ESPN Top 100 list. So similar to Sengun, how do you feel about Jalen Green's rank just right from the jump? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? Is he right where he needs to be at 69? This is what Nick Wright posted about Jalen Green. He said, Green boosted his efficiency last spring and averaged 30.2 points on 50% shooting from the floor and 45% from deep during an 11-game Rockets win streak in March. During the streak, Green became the youngest player in NBA history to average 30 points or more over an 11-game stretch while winning each of those outings. Green improved defensively in his first season with head coach Ime Udoka, and it's expected he'll continue to make strides in that department. Green mentioned recently that the Rockets need the playoffs and added, there's no reason for us not to get there. I think that's pretty fair. And again, for Jalen, that March stretch, as sensational as it was, is doing a lot of heavy lifting for kind of pushing his rank a little bit higher based on how kind of the earlier part of last season went. And that's totally fair, right? That's the optimism, is that Jalen went through those struggles in the early part of the season, was adapting, was learning the new system, was adjusting to being a more well-rounded player and developing in all the different facets of his game, right? Improving as a defender, improving as a decision maker, as a playmaker, all these different things. And then it all clicked in the month of March. And that's why we're hoping that the start of this season is more similar to the end of last season instead of the beginning of last season for Jalen Green. Makes a lot of sense. And I fully expect him to continue to grow in all those ancillary areas of his game too, right? But the biggest question mark for Jalen this year is how consistent can he be offensively, right? Can Jalen Green eliminate those lows in his offensive game? Can he eliminate the games where he just, has single digit scoring outings or is, the 4 for 17 performances or whatever. And even when those do occur, right, what else is he doing to help his team, right? Is he still defending at a high level? Is he playmaking and facilitating, right? Is he able to generate points by getting to the free throw line? Like all these little things that star caliber players do, right? If you want to be a star player, then you're going to be held to a star player standard. So Jalen Green ranked 69th. Last year, he was ranked 80th coming into the season. So an 11 slot improvement for Jalen Green. Next Houston Rocket on the list, and this one was a little bit confusing, and we're going to hear, I'll read some commentary from Sam Vecenie in a moment about why it's confusing, and I honestly fully agree here. Fred VanVleet comes in at 79th on the list. ESPN said VanVleet finished last season with his lowest scoring average since the 2019-20 season, but he averaged a career high in assists at 8.1. VanVleet's drop is somewhat surprising considering the leadership and stability the point guard brought last season to a young, often rudderless Rockets squad. That's just facts. Houston brought in VanVleet to be a culture builder, and there's more work there with Alperen Sengun, Amin Thompson, Jabari Smith, and Jalen Green still growing. He'll be tasked with helping the youngsters take the next steps in their development while serving as floor general for a team hungry to make the playoffs. That's fair. And even Nick Wright says it's surprising at his drop. And here's where it gets a little interesting. And this is what Sam Vecenie had to say about it. And I'm in full agreement with Sam here. Sam said, also, I think my official take might be that Fred VanVleet is back to being the most underrated player in the NBA. ESPN having FVV at 79 and Jalen Green ahead is insane. I feel like I'm losing my mind. They played on the same team last year. Fred was the clear best backcourt guy. VanVleet was so clearly the guy that lifted the Rockets to 500. His decision-making was huge, went from second to last in the NBA in offensive turnover rate to top 5. His defense and ball screens was huge. His overall communication, ranking him outside the top 75 is crazy. I fully agree with Sam here. Like, look, first off, Alperen Sengun was clearly the Rockets' best player last season, but Fred VanVleet was the Rockets' most important player last season. They went 1-6 when Fred didn't play last year. Like, the rails just completely came off the track, the wheels came off the train, whatever analogy you want to throw out there. It looked bad when Fred wasn't out there on the court. It looked bad when Fred was sitting to get rest on the bench in a given game. Like, that's how important he was. And so I don't think this should be viewed as like a disservice to Jalen Green, but Fred was the better player or the more important player or just both of them for the Rockets last season. Now, again, some of these rankings lists, I think, are intentionally ambiguous, just like the MVP voting and all this narrative-driven stuff. And maybe some of it is based on projection for this upcoming season. Maybe some of it's looking at how Jalen Green closed last year and the insane stretch that he went on. And there's some recency bias in there. And so, Nick Wright or the ESPN pundits are a little bit higher on him and decided to rank him ahead of Fred. But if you just looked at the counting stats, then yeah, you might feel that way. But for everything that Fred meant to this Rockets team last year, he was the better player. And he continues to be arguably the most important piece of this Houston Rockets team. Now, again, the optimism, last year it felt like Fred had to not only orchestrate and conduct the Rockets offense and get guys in their spots at a high level, but then also he had to generate some points. So he had to score 15 to 20 a night for the Rockets to have a chance to win games, it felt like. This year, hopefully, right, Jalen Green is ready to take that burden away from Fred and ready to be like a heavy hitter alongside Alperen Sengun on a nightly basis. And as long as Sengun and Jalen are doing their jobs, being the two big guns for the Rockets, then you have the role players can kind of step up and Fred can take a little bit more of a backseat offensively, just knock down the shots that he gets within the flow of the offense, set up guys like Dylan and Jabari to knock down their shots. And then you have the bench brigade, right, who comes in and wrecks shop with Thompson and Cam Whitmore and Reed Shepherd, right, and they can do some heavy lifting as well. So hopefully there's a significantly smaller burden placed on Fred VanVleet this season in particular, and he can just focus on really being the floor general and helping kind of expedite the development of guys on the roster, especially Reed Shepherd, as Jalen Green and Sengun are able to take on even more responsibility this year. But yeah, I think I'm in full agreement with Sam here. I don't know if I would outright flip them and move Jalen Green to 79th and Fred to 69th or whatever. But Fred should have been in front of Jalen on this list. Now, whether that just means Fred should have been at 65 or 60 or whatever, that part becomes a little bit more subjective as far as some of the other names go. I am very curious your thoughts though on that one, because I thought Sam really hit the nail on the head with that analysis. Last Houston Rocket to make the cut here on the list, Jabari Smith Jr. comes in at 92, 92nd player. So he, just barely making the cutoff. He was unranked coming into last season, and this is the blurb on him. Smith's career might be taking off a little slower than expected, but the rising third-year man appears to be on the verge of a true breakout season, coming off a 2023-24 campaign in which he tied his career high with 16 double-doubles while improving as a shooter and rebounder. Smith said veterans such as Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks helped him tremendously last season in teaching preparation, how to take care of his body, and how to study film. Expect him to apply those lessons early this season while likely making the most significant jump in his development. I think the toughest thing for Jabari here, I think the ranking him 92 is fair for Jabari. I got no issues with that one. I think the issue with Jabari here is he really does have such a narrow lane in which to thrive in on this Rockets team, right? There's so many mouths to feed. There's so many different guys to take care of. And oftentimes Jabari and his role, especially on the offensive end, kind of comes as an afterthought, right? If Jabari was playing on some other team, if he was playing for the Wizards or the Pistons or I don't know, take your pick of the dog water teams in the NBA, the Blazers, whatever, then yeah, maybe he'd get more leash offensively. Maybe he could explore more of his game and get more into some of his back to the basket game or his face up game and have more shot attempts on a nightly basis and really kind of work to explore his offensive game and see, what his true ceiling is as an offensive player. Whereas his rookie year, his development was kind of stunted because Silas did no experimenting with him. That would have been the year to do a lot of experimenting with Jabari because the Rockets weren't going to win hardly any games that year anyways. They were tanking, right? That could have been the year to experiment with Jabari, but it was the KPJ Jalen show instead. So he didn't really get that chance his rookie year. Then last year, he was kind of stuck in this role, not stuck in, but expected to play this role of just, he's a 3-and-D guy, right? He's a role player essentially in the Rockets system. And it's just tough because there's, it's hard to find the time and the ability, within the Rockets offensive hierarchy and structure to get Jabari those reps where he can, consistently work on and practice his face-up game, his back to the basket game, like the areas that, kind of are his bread and butter. He basically has to thrive in a very narrow lane of being a great and hopefully elite spot-up shooter, right? That's what he needs to bring to the table to be successful. And he's trending in a really positive direction, right? After a rough rookie year, he got back up to league average last season from three-point land. And as long as he continues that linear progression of development, then I don't think it's a stretch to say that this year he could easily get to 38, 39, maybe 40% from three. And then we're looking at Jabari, who is an improved defender, a very versatile improved defender, right? Can defend on the wing, can defend on the interior, right? He's still learning, he's still growing, he's still getting stronger. He's a better rebounder. He needs to work on his physicality in and around the basket, especially on the offensive end, right? We saw that on display in the game against the Pelicans, right? Getting blocked at the rim a couple different times. That's tough, and he needs to just play bigger and stronger. But we also saw moments of that last season where Jabari played a lot bigger and stronger than we ever saw him play before in his career. So I think some of it's like a mentality thing for Jabari, right? When he plays pissed off, when he plays a little angry, plays with a chip on his shoulder, he absolutely can be a big man out there in the paint. And so, yeah, it does kind of feel like he's poised for maybe not like a breakout season, like, oh my God, Jabari's going to play like an all-star this year. But I think it's very easily on the table for him to improve as a shooter, get the volume up, make more shots offensively, and just continue to play his role where he gets, averages something like, 17 and 10 seems fairly realistic for Jabari. 18 and 10, somewhere in that realm. And if he can grow into that role and be the Rockets' third best player offensively behind Jalen and Sengun, I should say, then that's your young core, right? At work. That's the development that you want to see. That's the track record that you want to see for Jabari Smith Jr. And, whether or not he's able to attain that this year, a lot of it is going to hinge on what his shooting looks like. I know he's struggled so far in preseason, not going to make excuses for it. He just flat out needs to be better, but I think he will be better. Color me, the eternal optimist when it comes to Jabari Smith Jr. if you want to. But with that, that's where the Houston Rockets ranked on the ESPN top 100 list. I'm not going to tackle the other, I'm not going to get into their top 10 rankings or whatever. If you want to check that out, the ESPN list is available. Just head over to their website. Coming up, want to talk a little bit about Rockets Spurs, the final preseason game, expectations for that, all that good stuff. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Hims. Look, guys, your sex life is important, right? But maybe your schedule's super busy and you don't have time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your very own couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication will ship directly to you in discreet packaging for free. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedonnba. That's hims.com, hims.com/lockedonnba for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so Rockets' final preseason game, their final dress rehearsal, if you will, against the San Antonio Spurs. First off, everybody on the Rockets is available and will be suited up for this game, minus Jock Landale against the Spurs. Udoka said the other day that Landale has apparently taken a few bangs in training camp, and after playing in the Olympics this offseason, they're just being cautious with Landale. I wouldn't look too much into it. It's probably just it's just the organization being preventative in nature. Just, there's not really a reason to force Landale to play in this game, especially if you're expecting and planning to play what is likely going to be your regular season rotation in this one. Then Steven Adams is clearly going to be ahead of Jock Landale. There's no reason for him to suit up for garbage time minutes in the fourth quarter when the starters are getting rest or when the regular 10-man rotation of guys is getting their rest. So, on the Spurs side of things, I would be completely shocked if Wemby plays this game. Pop has trimmed Wemby's minutes the last game that he played. Like he played like 20 something minutes last game. I would be absolutely flabbergasted if Wemby plays this game. And if he does, it's going to be for like maybe 15 minutes, like maybe one half of basketball for Wemby if they do roll him out. So I think the few things to look for in this game, one of which is this is going to be the Rockets' first of all 4 preseason games where they will have everybody who projects to be a part of their 10-man rotation healthy and available in the game. Now, as an aside here, I saw some Rockets fans kind of concerned about Tari Eason, like, oh my God, is Tari gonna be okay? They're just being cautious with Tari. That's all it is. To my knowledge, there's no like lingering issue. It's not like he's still dealing with any pain or anything like that. He is healthy. This is just the nature of a player coming off of, an injury to the degree that Tari did, the first serious like rehab that he had to go through in his career, all that stuff, right? So a little bit of cat hair on my tongue, incredible production value. So I wouldn't worry about Tari's, long-term ability to play or anything. Again, once the regular season gets here, Tari is a part of the rotation. Like he's going to be, what I will say is, and I can't take original credit for this idea. I think it was suggested by, at Firebear on Twitter, Chris White, shout out to Chris, loyal LOR fan. But the idea that this Rockets team is so incredibly deep that it's really tough for an NBA team to play a 10-man rotation on a consistent basis, right? There's almost always one guy out of like a 10-man rotation who's going to get squeezed for minutes on a nightly basis. That being said, there's probably a realistic pathway for the Rockets to, on any given night, rest one guy, right? On any given night, they could probably cycle and rotate the rest for the different veterans on the roster, right? Maybe one night Dylan Brooks gets a rest, one night Steven Adams gets a rest, one night Fred VanVleet gets a rest, one night you rest Jeff Green, one night you rest Tari, maybe. He's not a vet, but he's coming off the serious injury. I think there's a world where the Rockets and where Ime Udoka, rather than every single night having one guy who plays like maybe like 10 minutes, in a half, maybe he plays like the first half, like 8 to 10 minutes, and then he doesn't even see any run in the second half. Because it's like the Rockets are kind of stuck between a 9 and 10 man rotation. I'm going to call it like a 9.5 man rotation, right? That's kind of where they're at. And when you look at like the plethora of wings that they have, the depth that they have at the backup 5 spot, like they can rest so many of their different guys and not skip a beat. The one key guy that's going to be really tough to rest, as illustrated earlier when talking about his importance, is going to be Fred VanVleet, right? This team, is going to really struggle whenever Fred is not out there, unfortunately. And again, hopefully we see the growth from them and that they can get to a place where they can have success without Fred VanVleet on the floor in a given game. I'm not talking about just the minutes where Fred goes to rest on the bench. I'm a little bit less worried about those minutes now that they have Reed Shepherd and Amin and Cam and Steven Adams coming off the bench, Tari, like that. Their bench unit should be really strong. But you also take away from that bench unit, right, if you have to inject one of those guys into the starting lineup in place of Fred VanVleet. So I say all that to say, I think it's an interesting idea, and I'm very curious to see if Udoka and the Rockets kind of implement, that strategic kind of resting strategy. We know that Udoka comes from the Greg Popovich tree. We know the Spurs were at the forefront of the NBA's kind of, I can't call it cutting edge, like, I don't know, their resting practices, like the fact that they were able to elongate and extend the careers of so many of their elder statesman players, right? The big 3 in San Antonio, all that stuff, by resting them constantly, right? They kept their players fresh for the postseason. I remember there was that one year that the Spurs finished a little bit ahead of the Rockets in the standings. I think it was 16-17, the year where Kawhi got hurt in the Western Conference Finals against the Warriors after the Rockets lost to the Spurs in the second round that year. And I think it was that season the Spurs won 60 games without any player on their roster playing more than like 65 games or something like that. Like they rested everybody. They were constantly cycling guys. I don't know if this Rockets team will be able to look like that Spurs team with the rest component, but it's at least an interesting thought to entertain. It is of note, right? This is going to be the final dress rehearsal for the Rockets. Everybody fully expected to be suited up. So hopefully we get a true blue look at what the Rockets rotation is going to look like this season. Last game and the games before this, Ime said he was playing around with rotations. He was playing around with different lineups, trying to see different things, trying to get some data points to look at. This game, I expect to be the full dress rehearsal. Whatever substitutions we see, whatever rotations we see, those are likely going to be the rotations, at least when you look at the first half of substitutions. Those are likely to be the same rotations, the same lineups that Ime features on opening night of the regular season, a little under a week away against the Charlotte Hornets. So that's going to be the major takeaway from this is where does Ime sub certain guys out? Who are they going to be the first subs off the bench? Who are going to be the starters that kind of staggered with the second unit guys? Does he let Jalen Green kind of run the show in the second unit? Does he do what we saw some of last game where Alperen Sengun is also an early sub and he comes back in the second unit with Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun? How does he kind of divvy up the minutes across all 10 of these guys that are projecting to be in the rotation? That's kind of the main number one thing to look for. I think a couple other ancillary things to pay attention to. One, Reed Shepherd, apparently, and Fred mentioned this the other day at Rockets practice. Reed's been dealing with some back tightness. And that might be one of the reasons that he's struggled a little bit shooting the ball so far in preseason. I am genuinely so far from worried about Reed's shot, but I am hopefully the back tightness or whatever isn't a major issue. Hopefully it's just a little bit of, discomfort or whatever, and that he's got the Rockets medical staff and that they're working through it. It doesn't appear to be anything that's keeping him out of games, but for a shooter, right, for somebody who's so accustomed to, feeling his body a certain way and being able to go through his fluidity and all his movements and his shot motions and mechanics and all that, if you've got any level of a twinge in your back or something, if you've ever played ball before and you have an injury and you're trying to work your way through it, or you've got some discomfort or whatever, it can take you off your rhythm a little bit. So hopefully for Reed, it's nothing serious and he's just playing through it right now. And he still looks really good in certain stretches. The shot just hasn't fallen consistently yet for him. So hopefully he's fine there. For me, I think a couple of things to really look for is I want to see if Jalen can have one just really stellar game from all three levels. He was able to attack at all three levels last game, but he was just a little inefficient while doing it, right? Can he have one knock it out of the park, crazy efficient, 25 plus night where the numbers look good, the efficiency's good, and doing it from everywhere on the floor, right? That would be incredible to get, and that would, kind of inspire a lot of confidence going into the regular season. So can Jalen Green do that? Do we get a classic Alperen Sengun game? Because we still haven't really seen one where he flat out dominates, right? He had the game where he got to the free throw line a ton, but we still haven't seen a game where Sengun puts up his dominant performance, where the Rockets play heavy through him, whatnot. And maybe that's just not the direction that they're going to go this year with this year's team. Maybe we're not going to get the steady Sengun diet that we saw last season offensively, and whether that's good or bad is TBD on how this season looks and how the other guys play around Alperen Sengun, if he's used as more of a connective piece offensively rather than the focal point on the offensive end. I want to see Jabari hit some shots, man. Final preseason game, it's essentially going to be a tune-up game with no Wemby for the Spurs. Just knock down some shots, right? Get the confidence back before the regular season hits. Want to see Jabari knock down some shots. And for Sengun, I want to see him be a little bit more active on the glass. Feel like I don't want to say he's been slacking in the rebounding department, but that's one area of significant growth where you look at the gap between Sengun and Sabonis, at least as far as outward perception, national perception, whatever. I think Sengun is clearly the more talented player than Domantas Sabonis right now. But Sabonis is clearly the better rebounder. He's got a better motor than Sengun does. And there are certain things that Sabonis does better than Sengun right now. I still clearly think Sengun is the better overall player. He's clearly the more talented offensive player. He has an offensive bag, where Sabonis doesn't. Just sets a mountain of screens and will roll to the rim, and he gets, gimme baskets set up by his guards. So I want to see Sengun be a better rebounder this year, right? Crack that 10, 11 rebounds per game kind of metric. And if he can do that again, if he can get up to 25, 10 or 11 and 6 or 7 assists, that is true blue all-star production. That is a top 30, top 25 player in the NBA this season. So I just want to see him kind of up the rebounding numbers a little bit here in this final preseason game. and maybe a little bit of less reckless Cam Whitmore. That's going to be the other thing. Is Cam had a really strong game one, and the last couple games he's been kind of the bad version of Cam Whitmore, right? Or the loose cannon version of Cam Whitmore. So just rein it in a little bit. Try to, pick and choose spots a little bit better on the floor. That's really all it is. It's going to be a tune-up game with no Wemby for the Spurs. And again, the main thing to pay attention to here as Rockets fans is figuring out what the Rockets rotation is going to look like for the regular season opener. And this will be the true first dress rehearsal with Tari, pardon me, with Tari Eason back in the mix. So pay attention to the substitution patterns, pay attention to who comes off the bench first. Look at which lineups Ime Udoka decides to use. That's going to be the most important takeaway from this game. With all that said, that's going to do it for our episode today. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Again, the best way you can help our show out is to listen every single day on whatever podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop a comment while you're there. Share thoughts on today's episode, on the ESPN rankings list, on your expectations for the final preseason game, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.